do a really quick overview of the Blender interface and box modeling a really simple character. So first, I just want to go, if you have any questions about the keys that I'm using, you'll see them pop up with the key commands in the mouse click down here in the corner. This is an add-on for Blender. And let's just do a new. So if you click in File, New, you're going to see General and then all these other options. And these are just modes to start Blender in. It's the same as if you'd started it up here in one of these windows or in one of the options for Windows here. So we're just going to focus on General for 3D today. Don't save. All right, so we come in. We've got a box placed at the world center. This is our camera, and this is a light that shows up, and you'll see these represented over here in the scene collection. Collections are sort of like groups for objects, so you can organize your scene. And a default scene has a camera, this cube when it first starts up, and a light. If you want to see from this camera, like so right now what I'm looking at is kind of a scene tool camera that's not the rendering camera. So if I go and render, let's zoom in real close on the cube here, like this. If I hit render, it's going to open up a new window and start rendering, and notice that it doesn't look like the view that I left for rendering, because it's rendering from this camera right here. If you want to see from that camera and see what it looks like, you can click and it'll zoom in, and when you're seeing from the camera view, you're going to notice this little like cropping window that'll show the aspect ratio, which you can set in your printer in your output properties over here. And if I alt move out of that, it's going to just leave that camera view. So if I want to shift the camera position and get it somewhere and sort of frame up my scene, the way to do that is if you click on, there's a little arrow right here up in the corner near the widget, the tool for swapping views. If you click on that, and then under the view, you're going to see an object that says Lock Camera to View right here under View Lock. Check that and notice that this thing goes red. So now when I move, and I'm alt moving around, you won't see the keys because I'm in the camera mode. When I'm shifting around in the view, I can position the camera or the object within the frame, and the camera gets left there. And once I've got the camera positioned the way I want, if I render, it's going to render the scene based on where I had the camera. So that's how you kind of toggle and position the camera around using, in this case I'm rotating using Alt and the left mouse button. I can middle wheel zoom by just rolling in and out, or I can right mouse zoom by holding Alt and the right mouse button. And if I middle mouse Alt, I can pan around to position the camera around the object. It looks like I'm moving the object, but I'm actually moving the camera in the scene like a movie camera would work. All right, so once you've got that positioned and you don't want to stay in this mode and you want to leave the camera where you had it, you can turn off this little check box again under the tab over here for view. Just turn that off. You can close this up to minimize it. And now when I hit Alt, I'm going to move out of that camera, and there's the camera the way I positioned it. Excuse me. All right, so that's basically just manipulating the camera and setting up a scene. We've got this light. The same thing if you want to move an object. This light right now is a point light. If you want to see how that looks, right now it's not rendering the scene the way with lighting. You can tell because there's no shadows. You can up here in the right, this is all of our Viewport kind of window information. So we've got a tab for view object types, and you can basically hide things using this. So if you ever open up a scene and something's missing or not showing the way you'd want it to, it's probably tabbed off here. And then you've got the show gizmo, which if I toggle that off, notice that it hides the gizmo. And this is just another way of like zooming to specific views, or even just you can grab that without having to use a keyboard or alt and position the camera or the viewport camera that way. But this is a nice way of kind of seeing things from orthographic angles, which can kind of be a clean way of working. Let me see. Sometimes it's easy to get, so notice that I flipped everything upside down. So if I do this, there we go, because the camera was above ground. So anyway, that's the gizmo. Toggle that using this, and you can tell what you want it to show. So there's move, rotate, scale. And then there's showing all these options for showing extras. If you want to turn on wireframe, you can do so there as well by clicking right here. And notice that it turns on a little outline for the wireframe, but you can do that over here as well. Sometimes it's good to work with wireframes, other times not so much. This is a really handy kind of icon right here, this little layer in front of a layer or square. It's called X-ray. So if I want to X-ray, you don't really notice it in object mode. You can kind of see that there's a transparency and you can see through the object. When that really works well is if you want to be able to select points or lines, vertices. If you go into edit mode, select the object, go into edit mode. We'll talk about that in a minute. Notice that it hides the back facing stuff without the X-ray turned on. And when I turn on the X-ray, you can see everything. So basically it's a nice way of, if I do without it, if I select like this, then I've only selected the stuff that I could see, which can be useful. But if I want to select everything, turn that on, drag select, and now you've got every vertex or face or line, depending on which one of these you want to select, selected. So that's a nice way of being able to select through an object. Otherwise, if I say like just this, then I'm just going to select those two faces. I just toggled the face selection right here, and I just drag selected, right? Or I can just select this one, and I've only selected that face. If I have this turned on though, and I drag, and notice that when I have that turned on for faces, it shows these center dots. You can still, if you don't drag across that center point, it won't select. So it's sort of a fine-tuned way of selecting. But you can also just click. So I can just select the faces through the way I want them selected without having to go around or rotate around to select all of the faces. We'll get into why that's useful here when we do our box modeling. Okay, so I'll turn off the X-ray mode, and that gets us, we'll go back into object mode here. That gets us into the viewport view modes, or ways of showing the object itself. So if you want to see just the wireframe, you can toggle that, which is this little cage, circular cage. If you want to see it semi-shaded, not lit, this is the mode, and this is also a useful way of like showing colored groups of objects. So if I select this and then copy and paste it and then shift, let's say I want one of these to be one color represented as a type of object or class of object, I can go under its material and show under viewport display, just pick a color for it. So I might want this object to be red objects, and this object, it'll have its own material, and I might want it to be blue or light blue. So in that, with those selected, then I can kind of group objects. It's a way of having like a complex scene and being able to easily see what's what based on these material color or viewport display color settings. This won't affect, notice that both of these are using the exact same material called material 1. So if I change this to yellow as a base color in that material, you can see that I've got now the material, the kind of icon turns yellow. These are still red and blue. In order to see the material shading, I have to go to the next level, which is this kind of pie sliced sphere. And now we have that. So I only changed it on this one because it was selected. This one shows up now as material 1 because when I duplicated it, it duplicates the material. So if I want to make that yellow as well, I can go back and change that to material. Go back here, now they're both blue because this viewport display is associated to the material. So they're basically, it's like a way of seeing the material class if you want to make it represented by a specific color. It shows up, it's easier to explain, it shows up better on more complex scenes, but that gets us into the actual material rendering or shading, which you're not going to see here. So if I'm in just standard shaded mode, notice I don't see the base color. If I make it super metallic and really shiny by cranking the roughness down, nothing changes here. If I go into this, however, now I see that I can actually tweak the material shader. So if I want to make it less metallic, I just slide that, you'll see it in real time. And the same thing with the roughness going both ways. So if I wanted to make it kind of a rough, kind of a metallic, reflective, opaque, I'd go sort of maybe 0.2 on the roughness and give it full metallic. There is no such thing as like half metallic. So really technically this should be like a toggle. You can fake materials, I guess, with this, but something's either metallic or it's not. So if you're going to make something metallic, crank this all the way up. And then you've got all these other settings. We're not going to go into material settings in this. I just wanted to show you that this viewport shows the actual shaded options, in this case using the Eevee renderer. One question you might have is, when I cranked, like, where's this reflection coming, this environment? It's basically just a default environment. It won't render, so if I hit render, notice it shows flat because there is no real default environment. It's using, if you pull down on this little arrow key right here, it's using this placeholder, so you can play around with materials, I guess. And if you click on that, there's a lot of other options which will change the environment reflections. This is one that I made, some that I've loaded. So basically these are the kind of like viewport environment options. If you want to actually render an environment on this thing using kind of a rendered environment, you're going to need one of these equirectangular images, and you will load it in the shading port. I'll show that. Well, let me just show you real quick right now. So this is another way of seeing this material that I had on the object. Notice it's a different tag up here, or tab, and this is the actual material node because we're showing it as nodes. If I want to change this reflective environment and actually get an environment to render with a reflection, kind of a reflected photographic environment in the background, you have to pull down on this object tab right here, change it to world, and now we have this background option. And then we can add, if you do a search for environment texture, and just put that in, and then you can open an equirectangular, which I just happen to have. Let me go to the folder, 3D textures, and then down here one of these. So let's do Rocky Ridge. So this is an HDR image, which means it has extra color data that will allow it to light the scene better, because these actually show up in lighting. So now that I've added that, I just need to connect that to the color output. And then if I want to drive it, I actually want to set it up to render with, I have an add-on, which is under Edit, preferences, and you'll see, and this is one you should all activate. So this is called Node Wrangler right here. You just want to turn that on and leave it turned on, and basically that's going to help you out when you're doing material stuff. And by help, all I mean is that instead of adding some nodes to get this thing to work, I can just hit Control T with this selected, and it's going to add a mapping node and use the UV normals so that this thing can then be rotated using these rotation axes. So if we want to see this environment that I just added, all we have to do is turn on Scene World. Oops, there we go. And that was just up here in this pull down again for viewport shading. I just turned on the ability to see the world, and we'll also turn on scene lights so that the light's affected as well. And this is the environment that I added, shows in the background. And this is the metallic object reflecting that environment, so that the light, the sun, which is coming from over here, actually shows up in the reflection. If you want to rotate that, you can, I think it's on the Z, yeah. You can basically just, in your material node, grab this Z and rotate so that you can position the lighting of the world however you want against the object. And now, if we render, the object should show up with some reflection and the environment in the background. Okay, so again, based on that camera where I positioned the camera before. Anyway, that was a lot of information, but basically I'm just going through and trying to show this the important tab information in the interface itself. So we're in shading mode. This was me setting up the world. If I want to go back and look at the object, whatever object is selected, I just pull down on this tab, this pull down menu, and I can come in here and add stuff. So right now, this is the same as this because I've selected the little material tab here. If I want to add a texture, let's say I want to make this square have like a brick bump. There's a thing called a normal map here, and we can add a color as well. Let's make it, and let's see what we want to make. So we can go under add, and in this case I want to add a texture, image texture. So there's a texture node, but it has no texture applied to it yet. I can open one. I'm going to go to the same place I got my world texture, and I will apply, let's do this stone wall maybe. No, it's a displace and a color. Hold on. Let's try red brick. Yeah, see this. These are all the different types of maps that I might want to use. It's called PBR shading. We'll get into that later. But basically, I want the color, which is the diffuse texture here. Apply that to my base color. So now this will get replaced with this brick that we see, but it's still got this metallic info. I can copy and paste this texture, and then we will add a roughness to it and apply that to the roughness node there. Now in this case I may want to go ahead and, since brick is obviously not metallic, I'll take it down. So we start to see that you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a roughness difference in the reflection on this. Usually these are set to like non-color. Yeah. So that if it's not actual color data, there's a color space. I'll explain this in class, but basically it's just how this color gets managed by the computer. If it's not actually applying to color, like roughness would not be applying to color, you can set it to non-color so that it's not adding some extra contrast or something to the image map. You just get it almost as like a raw texture. And then I can copy and paste this one and oops, drag down one more, And I'm going to add a normal map, so this will actually add the bumpy part. In this case, yeah, right here, this normal, red brick normal. And I need a space, I need a node in between these two. So basically I go add, and then I can just search. What I want is a normal map. So I just hit norm and this normal map. Move that there, add the color, and then take that into the normal. And now you'll see that we have, let me make sure this is set to non-color also. Now you see we have this kind of relief where the lighting affects it and doesn't cast shadows, but it casts kind of specular highlight on this object. Let me check. I just want to make sure. Set this to sRGB on the roughness and see if it looks any better. So you can see how it's different, right? So it's super shiny this way. So yeah, I'm going to say the non-color is better. So it's kind of a semi-shiny brick bump. Now if you want to increase that bump, the strength right here, you can do that. You can also, you can't go in reverse. So that's 0. It's like 1.2. So that gives you a little extra realism in the map. And it still is reflecting the environment. Just not as much because this roughness texture is only allowing it to be reflective in certain parts, basically like water. This is great for like doing a semi-wet road or slick rocks or something like that. And if you want to see, just to prove the point that this is being affected by the light, if I change the world rotation, you will see how the highlight changes on the object for the bump. All right, anyway, let's go back to modeling. So we are back to modeling, and based on this color, and it's not showing the brick, you know that we're in just shaded mode, not render mode. The last option over here is kind of a viewport shading rendered mode. That will show you the full render view. Notice that this one shows sort of the viewport window in the background, and this shows you with the environment and everything the way it would look. And that's that. So if we take this light, and you notice as I move it, it'll change the lighting across the object. It doesn't really, so the fact that we're using two things, so like we've got this scene with the sun in the background, and that is obviously lighting this object one way, and then this light is lighting it as well, can be conflicting with the realism of the scene. So basically this is like, you want to add lights if you don't have some sort of global illuminated background, and say maybe you just want to change this scene and make it a nighttime scene and add some street lights to this. To do that, you could go to shading, go back to world, and under the strength for the background, just take that down to like a 2 so that it's less lit by the background, or even a 1. So you still get some of this background environment shading, but now this light contributes a lot more to the lighting of the object. And we'll cast shadows if we enable them. In this case, the viewport itself doesn't. There's really nothing to cast shadows against. So if we add, I'm just going to go in the object mode, add mesh plane. I'll scale that up. Now we have something for it to cast shadows against. So this light is casting the shadow, right? So if I turn that light off, now it's off, and you'll get some shadows from this environment, but because I've set it so low on the render, it's not going to show. And really, for an HDR image, the shadows won't cast in real time. You'll have to show them in rendered mode, and it has to be in an alternate render engine called Cycles. Let's just check out to make sure. Shadows. Yeah, it's not. You could bake using this. I'm not going to go into all this stuff that has to do with the render settings yet, but you can turn them on. But basically, the kind of shadows you're going to get in the real-time render are going to come from these light options. Speaking of light options, this is currently a point light, which would be like a light bulb, or yeah, like a light bulb, or pretty much a light bulb, because it casts out in all directions. If you click over here on the right, you're going to start to notice a pattern where when I'm clicking on an object, if I want to get some or modify something about that object, it's going to happen over here on the right. So if I want to modify this light, there's a light tab right here under the object data properties. And I can change the light type. So right now it's a point. If I wanted to make it a sun, I can turn on the sun, but notice that the strength of it went up to like 1,000 while the point was 1,000, but it sort of diminishes a little bit more. The radius was low. Sun at 1,000 is super bright because it's so close to the object. So if I want to crank that down, I can make it like 10. And the difference between a point and sun is like sun is directional light. So wherever this points, this little direction pointer is where the light's going to point. So that's another way of making kind of a sunlight positioning. And based on the distance of the sun and its width, will crank up the sharpness of the shadow. So by having a wider kind of point diameter here in terms of the angle, it's going to soften the shadow. And if you want to change the colors or the strength, you can crank them up or down. Okay, so I think that's enough on lighting for now, except for spotlight, which is like theater type lighting. And basically means that you can change the kind of cone that the light will shine. Not sure why it's not shining. So there's the cone. Maybe that it's not very bright. May take more brightness. For some reason, spot's not working. Oh, its radius is small. And that's the penumbra. Set to cast a shadow. Huh. It's not. Yeah, spot for some reason is not working. I'm not sure why. I'll look into that. And then there's an area light, which is basically this similar to a spot, but is kind of meant for like windows or portals. And it's a square. And it will, I know that these work, but for some reason it's not casting the same. So we'll get into that when I talk about lighting. For now, let's make it a point. In fact, we can pretty much turn it off because I'm more interested in this lighting around the edge. Okay, we're going to go back to modeling. I'm in my modeling view. So this is how you get around. This is object-related data. This is scene-related data. This is your modes for Blender. of which you're going to basically stay in modeling, sculpting, UV editing, texture paint, shading, and animation and rendering. Compositing is for like taking multiple images and doing special effects later. And then when you're in these modes, there's object mode right here in this pull down. When you select an object, you get its specific mode types. So you've got object mode, edit mode, sculpt mode, vertex mode, weight paint, texture paint for this particular object. If you do something different, in this case it's because it's a mesh, you're still going to get the same options. The one you're going to be most concerned with most of the time is edit mode or object mode. In edit mode, you get the option to select by vertex, edge, or face, and then you have the ability to modify the geometry in kind of a destructive way. So let's say I want to select one of these faces right here, and I want to inset it. This is your inset faces tool right here. You click that, and then you just drag on that face, and it's changing the geometry. I don't know if you can see based on the line, but it's created a new face on this square, while in the meantime leaving the UVs the same, so it didn't adjust everything. And then if I want to extrude that, I can click on this extrude object right here, extrude region, and take that down into the box. And notice that does mess with the UVs, but it creates some new geometry. We can fix this later. And that's how extrusion and insetting works. You can bevel these edges. So if I select by edge, I just double clicked and it'll select the edge loop all the way around. I can take this bevel tool and just drag across the edge and create a bevel that way. And then I can do the same thing around this edge. Slowly. And it kind of creates a less sharp edge for the object. If I wanted to do all of the edges, I can go back and undo that and then select all of these, as well as the base, and do the exact same drag. So now I'm going to set it to be about like this thick. Before I click off of the object, notice that it's applied this bevel. It also created this little window option down here. It's called bevel. If I open that up, I get a bunch of options for how the bevel works. So I can change the thickness here by sliding it. I can also add more segments to smooth it out, to make it really smooth. And I can change the profile. So basically, if I do, like, let's say let's do 3. And then I shift the profile, you'll see how it'll go interior versus exterior. So you can kind of bevel in a different direction. And that's for loop sliding by toggling this. Face strength mode. Yeah. So you can also change the miters, whether or not they're sharp or an arc or patch. And by miter, it just means this part, where, let me go back to less faces. So, yeah, I don't have enough geometry to do it with this, but if I go one more, try to round it out, it's basically going to create this arch across the entire face. When I set it to arc, if I set it to sharp, does it seem to be changing? There we go. So that was the outer miter I was working on. This is the inner miter, which is this. And you'll see that it changes the behavior of the type of the kind of the way the miter works. So it rounds out the, this is the inner part. This would be the outer part. So the inner part is what the face itself does. So that's where it's arced right here. When I do sharp, basically it's squared, and this is what's left to miter. Arc and arc. I'm guessing if there was something, a face that was in here, if I was beveling something and there was a face that was interior, then that would be the outer miter would be the one that gets controlled there. We can shift the spread of the miter along the object. Notice that if I go past a point where it can't really draw the geometry, it's going to create issues. So anyway, that's enough of that. Let me go back and take this to like 1, and that gives you another view of what the difference in the box, the miter itself is. Kind of like the sharp better for simpler low poly objects. All right, so that's beveling. Let's say I just want to add some geometry or an edge loop in places. There's this loop cut tool. Notice that if I click on that and then just click here, I can slide and hold. I can slide this loop, and it just allows me to add geometry or edge loops in places that can allow for an edge loop. So in other words, if I take this point and select using the select box, if I select across just these 2 points and then right click and do connect vertex pairs, it's going to draw these triangles across and connect through, creates a line through it. I've just done that to break up the edge loop capability for this, because now this has become at least here there's a triangle, and it doesn't understand how to draw an edge loop across triangles. So if I do an edge loop in the center, it's quads, so it can get through, but here it breaks because well, it was still finished the edge loop, but it couldn't quite see. If it was more complex geometry, it wouldn't be able to. Oh, I undid my triangulation. So I can't, just for example, I can't get a full edge loop going around the bevel because I've got these triangles going on the miters. So anyway, that's that. So then once I've added these edge loops, what can I do with those? I can select again by face and do some four-sided inset faces. And maybe then do a extrude along normals instead of doing the standard extrude regions. So if I extrude along normals, it's basically going to just extrude based on the face normal itself. So I can create some inset edges to this box that way. So anyway, this is just basic box modeling, me showing you some of these tools, how they work. If I wanted to smooth, it's just going to shift the points based on what's selected. So let me select all of these. Whoops. To select, you have to go back to this select box or shortcut Q. Notice that when I drag select here, because I didn't have the X-ray mode on, I didn't select all of the faces, so I can turn on X-ray and select everything. And then if I go back to face and do smooth, I can basically soften up the entire object. So it tries to like shift all of the faces in a way that kind of softens the break or the edge. But I'm also sort of super distorting this texture map that I've applied to it, but kind of softens the object up that way. So it's it's one way of creating rounder edges or shifting things to kind of like make it a little bit more organic looking than it might be otherwise. I won't go into these bottom tools for now. Go back to object mode. So now we've got this modified cube. If I wanted to fix these distortions in the UV maps where I've done these extrusions, all I have to really do is think about, well, there's a couple of easy ways to do it. If I go to UV editing, let's turn on our shaded mode and go to edit, and here select all my faces. Here is the way our UV map looks based on what it was originally, which was set up for a cube. If I do a UV unwrap, it's going to just try to do the exact same thing. Plus it also doesn't have really any instructions on how to do this unwrap any differently than it already has. If I want to do something a little different, I can do a smart UV project, which is basically like saying, give me a breaking angle and I'll just divide this thing into a bunch of pieces. In this case, I've set it to 60, the default is 66. And that's going to break up or apply this texture map, and notice that it just makes a whole bunch of different faces. Let me hide the texture. Oops. I believe there's a way to hide. That's the roughness map. It at least lets me see the UVs the best. So this is the way it broke it up. If I wanted to make or change the tiling of this texture across the entire object, I can select by point, drag select across everything, and then scale bigger or smaller. So you notice that as I scale, it changes over here and increases the resolution of the brick map. So now, if you wanted to fix these that are sort of turned sideways, kind of facing the wrong direction. So let's say I want them to go horizontal. I just selected all those faces. I can hit E over here in the UV map mode and hold down Control so that it locks to angles, and then just rotate it 90 degrees. I can do the same thing with the sections that seem to be facing the wrong direction. This one's horizontal, and that one is. Yep. Then just take those and E, rotate, hold down Control, and then maybe the point I'm trying to make is that lining these things up takes some work, which is part of the reason that you do box modeling and low poly modeling, so that because you'll add textures sort of later, because you notice that every time we do something destructive to the object, we're going to end up having to do some new UV map manipulation in order to get the thing to display correctly. So that getting these things to line up a UV map to sort of skin across the object correctly takes a lot of work. There are other options for getting this to do it correctly. So in other words, I could do select by line here, just create like a seam where I can unwrap it across certain points like this. Yeah, something like that. And then right click and mark seam, which will make this red line. And basically what then, if I go and do this UV unwrap, I've got to select all the faces that I want to unwrap. UV unwrap. Notice that it tries to do something a little bit different here, and tries to keep things sort of connected, which means that the map itself will be then connected. In this case, because I left I didn't create the seams efficiently. It's not really unwrapping it completely in the way that it should. So in other words, let's look at the whole thing. This square here, this part is messing up the works. So if I select these two edges, UV, and then mark seam for those, and then do a UV unwrap again. Notice that it does a little bit better because I freed up this thing that was causing it to distort. I could probably cut this, and that one is cut. That and this, actually this. I'm just going to mark these in UV mark seam, do another unwrap, and that helped it a little bit more. Still wants to distort. I can straighten those out. I can unlock these by cutting them. Mark seam. And probably just one of these edges and all of these. Now if I do it again, notice that it tries to unwrap that way. And you can start to see where the seams are. Okay. So if I want to get this right, I can double click on this edge and then just do a line Y. It's going to straighten that line out, or sorry, a line X. Straighten that line out. Same thing here. Hit G to do it again. I can only do it on certain edges because they're contiguous. And that should straighten it out. And then the same thing on this. Align Y so that it lines up. Basically, I'm just double clicking to straighten out all the edges that aren't straight. Line X. Line Y. And that starts to get sort of a straighter edge going this way. Then maybe I want to take the entire island, which is everything here, and rotate it so that the bricks align, and then scale that up. And that starts to show you that this is how you start to get better alignment across the entire image. And you can see that there's still some issues, like right here with the bevels. Turn off X-ray right there. And that's partly this weird shape. So if we go and we selected all these and we got these straight, they should line up better. So UV and be align X, yeah. Line Y, oops. I'm just straightening the lines out. Oops. Oh, I'm selecting by island. I need to select by edge. And basically we can do them all at the same time just by selecting all of them. You only want to do the ones that should align on each selection. And then these I'll have to do individually. And I can just hit G to repeat the last command just by selecting each one of these lines. And then basically G is just kind of a universal, repeat the last option or the last command that you did. Fair warning though, some of the commands in Blender, for whatever reason, don't work with that for G. One of them is like this connect faces that you may have seen me do at the beginning of the video. Doesn't work. It won't repeat. So you have to run, if you're doing a lot of connect faces, you have to do that kind of manually. All right. So still not great on this face. The reason being that this is a straight end bevel and it shows as a kind of a true bevel where it's kind of, this is getting flattened because of the way the bevel it's connected. So if we go and just disconnect, actually we can just do by line here. Double click, can select across, can select that way and just mark seam. Probably actually, if we just split these, mark seam, and I'm just going to use that as an example. I won't do them all, but now if we do another unwrap, and scale everything again, that's going to mess up all of that stuff that I did. So if you just want to unwrap a part of the image, you can just select the faces that you want to unwrap. So in this case, I just want to fix this, UV, unwrap. It fixes it, straightens out the edges. Notice got some pretty good texturing there. Just needs to be rotated. And just hit E, hold down Control so that you get like a 5-degree rotation arc. And you can get it to a straight edge that way. Okay. Alright, so that is a lot, I know. But real quick, I just want to show you how to do like a quick, taking all of these techniques that we've done, just mainly the modeling parts, and we're going to model a really quick kind of Minecraft box model character. So let's go to object mode. I'm going to delete that brick cube. I'm going to add a new cube. So this gets us into the next part of the interface, which is this view, select, add an object. Nothing is selected right now, so if I hit object I get all these, but if I do something with them it's not going to do anything because there's nothing selected. If I want to add an object, I can add a mesh. There's a whole bunch of other things you can add here. For now we're just modeling, so I'm going to add another cube since we're making a Minecraft character. And I will apply, yeah, let's add our brick material to it. Why not? Call him Bricky. Alright, so the first thing is I'm going to treat this as his head. Pull it up here. And we should talk about axes. So this red line is the x-axis. This green line is the y-axis, and z, which does not show because it's through the up and down, is the vertical axis. So what we want to do is we want to generally model across the x-axis because that's the orientation for most game engines, 3D modeling software, whatever. So to start this model, we should think about symmetry, how we can model with symmetry, so that we're modeling with symmetry, particularly because it's a human being or a boxy human being across the x-axis. So the first thing we want to do is make this box, scale it, position it up here, and then go into edit mode. And then with our loop cut tool right here, I want to insert an edge right across the center. It'll automatically snap to the center of the object. I just want to do that. Now I want to select the faces across the one side on the x-axis, which is marked by this red line. I want to delete those faces. And now I have half a box. All right, so now this gets us into another part. So I've got this box. I've gone back into object mode, and this little wrench tool right here is called the Modifier tab. I want to add a modifier to this object so that it will mirror across an axis and allow me to do half the work by only modeling half the character. So I want to add a modifier, and I want to add under generate the mirror modifier. Notice that it automatically flipped and added the geometry across this x-axis because that's by default. That's what it does. There's all kinds of other things you can do with this modifier. You can make it just mirror specific vertices. You can mirror it across specific objects. By default, without an object selected, it's going to mirror across the axis, the world center axis. One other thing I want to do, though, is I want to kind of up the merge limit, which is basically going to say, like, any geometry that's created along the center line, which we really don't want, we can work across it, but we don't want to shift things. We want to keep that center line right along the world axis. Anything that's close to that will be merged so that it has no hole made in the object. And that's pretty much it. So now, if we go back into edit mode, notice that when we get the option to, I'm going to go into shaded mode so we can see a little differently. When we get the object selected, we can only operate on half of it. We can't see this other half. We can't select anything on this other half. So if I select this face and pull it out, it moves the other side. If I select this face and pull it out, it makes it wider. If I insert an edge loop here, it'll insert an edge loop over here, but we don't see it because we're not getting the option to see it here. If I want to see those modifications on this side, I can just turn on this on cage, and then you'll see it across the axis, but you don't have to have that turned on. It may actually confuse you in terms of which side you're working on face-wise. So let me go back, undo that, adding that edge, because right now, like I said, we're just going to model a box or a Minecraft guy. And you're like, well, why am I modeling symmetry on a boxy Minecraft guy? Well, you'll see in a sec. So if we select this face, with this selected, we'll have the option to, we could do an inset here. The problem is that inset's just creating geometry and leaving the center, it's messing up the center axis in a way that we don't really want. So what we really want to do is we want to kind of dissect this thing using our insert edge cut tool. So I'm just going to make like a loop there and a loop there, and then maybe I'll insert one, can't really get the edge here, The reason being, I'm looking to make a neck here. So if I select this face now, and then I extrude the region, extrude it down. Now I've pulled out a neck for our head. And I know Minecraft characters don't really have necks, but we're going to make one because we want this guy to be to be able to be modified in the future to have more detail. Now when I did that extrude, the way extrude works is it created this extra face inside that we don't really want in the neck. So just to give you an idea of how that works, if I pull that apart, now we've got a hole in our head. You can see through it, but you can also see that we've got this geometry, this interior face that we don't want on the interior of a model. So I just undid to get it snapped back to the center. So all we have to do is in X-ray mode, select that interior face and delete the face. So now you can see the way the edge flow goes, that our neck is hollowed out from the inside. It's like a box interior. So from this then we can take this face and do another extrude down. And let's make this the body, the chest. So let's go and select that interior face that got created again. Delete that. So there's our body, but it's sort of a straight down body. We don't want it. We might want it to sort of come out because the torso is going to be a little bit wider than the head perhaps. So we can select these three faces and we can actually, let's do it one at a time. Let's extrude this face to the right. So there's like his shoulders, or his, the width of his torso. Then we'll select these two faces to come off the chest, and these on the back. We'll extrude along the normals. So we're just going to come out. Now again, because we did it across the center line, we've got some extra geometry created, so we can just delete these interior faces. And we're back. We're good again. So now let's turn off X-ray just so we can see what we've got. So we've got like a head and a body with some extra geometry. It's not really as low poly as it could be, but we can quickly get there by doing some really cool things like this, where we take this point and this point, and if we right click, I just selected this in this second, right click and merge vertices at last, and it'll automatically snap that point. Hit G and do it again for that one, and it'll just snap it to the last point that you had. G. And I accidentally hit F, so I need to right click at last, and again. So now we've gotten rid of that geometry and just created these points, right? We don't really need this along the bottom, so I'm just going to merge those two. If we decide we do need it later, we can add it back. I'm going to take these and do the same. Just remember that because I'm merging it last, the last thing you select has to be the thing you click. I'm going to leave, let's go ahead. We're going to make it super Minecrafty here. So now we've really reduced this thing. So we've got a box with a neck and a torso. Okay, now we want to add some arms. How do we add arms? We could make the arms separate the way Minecraft actually has it, but maybe we want to make this a base model for some more organic looking character later. So the way we can add an arm into the torso is to literally just do an inset like this. With that selected, scale it a little bit to make it box here, and then shift it up closer to the top of the chest. And then from that we can extrude out. Whoops. Extrude this region out. So there's our arm. I'm just going to extrude it the full length of the arm. And then we can do an inset for the elbow. And we might want to extrude a hand. So I'm going to keep the hands boxy for now. Like that. So there's our arms. Now we want to add, this is just the chest, so we may want to add sort of an abdomen area and then some hips. So we'll extrude down and then call that the stomach, and then this will be the hips, so you can kind of bend at the waist. Now remember, because we just extruded with the center select, or the center line, along the center line, we need to turn on X-ray and delete these interior faces. It doesn't matter if we do it now or if we do it later, but just get it while we're thinking about it to get it done. Alright, so what that can then do is you can do some coolness, like grab these faces. If you want to taper the torso, you can do that. We can select this edge, go to F1 so that we're centered orthogonally, and just pull that edge to get it lined up too, like that. These will be the hips. Alright, how do we make the legs? Alright, so we could just extrude straight down, but while we're thinking about it, we can also just do an inset, so that we kind of get sort of a crotch, or a room for a crotch, I should say. And the legs will be a little bit narrower than the hips. So then from that we can extrude down, and that also keeps our legs separate. All right, let's see. Torso. Now just extruded like the base of a foot or an ankle. And I can extrude feet out from that, something like that. And then if we do an insert right there at the knee, we've basically got a super box model, super base box model. No fingers yet, but everything that I've just shown you how to do can basically be, can work towards as a finger, kind of a way of making a finger. Maybe what I want to do now, since I've got these legs separate, is I can go ahead and do the merge at last to join them back up so that it comes out of the hip without having this taper, to kind of make it look a little bit more leg box model-y. And if I wanted to fix or add a crotch line here, I could do so once I've gotten rid of the mirror operator by selecting this edge and doing a bevel, and that would insert the gap or the space in the crotch. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that. You might want to just tweak these edges to make it kind of have some taper in the arm. And you get the idea. If you wanted to add fingers, an easy way to do so, let's go ahead and grab this. So the hand should, this is like a standard T-pose, the hand should be narrower than the forearm and the arm, so I've just kind of squashed it down that way. And a way to make fingers here is to insert, one way you can do it is to insert an edge down the middle, so you can basically create the gaps to extrude the fingers out this way, but you're going to be creating a lot of geometry across the torso that way. So instead, I can use this knife tool and just cut a point. I'm holding down, trying to hold down Shift. cutting a line that way, and then right click, and that'll split. Now I've got an n-gon here, which means I've just got more than 4 points. But to close that up, I can again draw this point to here that way, and from here to here. You can make this so that it snaps, but we can always just clean it up with the merge points. And then we'll do it across the bottom too. Let's go ahead and turn on, select by point, and then turn on magnet. This is a snap tool to the vertex. So then I can just click and click, right click, 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 right click. So now I've got 2 fingers here, and I can just do the exact same thing to add the other 2. Now I've got 4 fingers, and to fix this triangle, I can basically cut across to there, and there, and there, so that I get a quad back. And then I could run this so that it becomes a quad 2. It just gets into topology questions, like how do you want this thing to run? Let's straighten these edges out just by selecting the edge and hitting R and then scaling them flat on whichever axis we want. And the same thing on this one. Whoops, wrong way. There we go. So now I've got 4 fingers. And to get them to extrude individually, I can just there's a couple of ways I can do this. I could again do the inset trick. I'm going to turn off my x-ray so I can just select each one of these. So I could do inset like this. By doing that, then they're still joined at the center. There may be a way. Let's see if I can do inset. Nope, there's no options on inset. Another way is to extrude, but extrude individual. So by doing that, even though it looks like I'm extruding together, I'm just pulling them out here, and I'll flatten them a little bit. If I want to spread them, they're all individual now. If I want to spread them, I can just, instead of doing this globally, right here, I want to set this to individual origins. This is the transform pivot point. So by doing it on individual origins, when I scale them, they will scale individually. If I have it set for bounding box or 3D cursor or whatever, it's going to scale relative to whatever I set that pivot point at. But by doing that, you can see that now I've got these 4 fingers, and they're all individually set. And I can pull them up a little bit, and then I can insert knuckles using the insert edge loop. So I just want to do like 2. Each finger has 3 knuckles, 3 joints. One at the hand, and then the fingers. And then I could double click, and pull these out, down a little bit further. Same thing. I can shorten these because it's the pinky. Take this finger and shorten it. This one a little bit there, and this one. So now we've got sort of the beginning of a hand. And if we want to do the thumb, same process right here. Do an inset. I'm just going to pull that out a little bit because the thumb kind of comes off of the hand a little bit. Like that. I'll scale it. And then maybe rotate it. Oops. Make sure you rotate it flat along the right angle. And then I can extrude a thumb out from that. I'll scale that. W. Oops. Make sure when you're selecting on this axis, you don't accidentally select one that takes it in the wrong direction. Sometimes it's hard to see. So there's a thumb. We'll just add one little loop here for that. Double click, and I'm going to rotate that a little bit and scale it. Now, when I set it to scale, it's going to go for a global kind of on the XYZ axis. If I change that to local or normal, the normal will make it align to the actual kind of face normal, in this case the edge loop normal that it's got, so that I can scale relative to that normal. And rotate. I'm getting a little picky here, but anyway, that's a super basic box model Minecraft character. So that's the general basis of box modeling. Once I've got that, if I wanted to say, okay, well now I want to add some more detail. Obviously, I can add a lot more detail in the face by doing the same options, where I might split the face into a top, maybe even make like a, this could be where the eye goes. This will be the mouth, like that. And then do a center line. Notice I'm doing a center line across the entire body, so I'd want to clean that up or just do a knife tool. I'll get into that in more detail, but another way to do it is to go back to object mode, and then after this mirror, I can add another modifier, which would be a subdivision surface. And notice that our guy becomes a little bit more rounded. Nah, more like a Lego character, I guess, instead of Minecraft, but you get the idea. And on top of that, it's added a lot of detail that I can go in and tweak further. I can increase this viewport subdivision to change it, and it gives me enough detail to sort of create a good character that I could start to deform or sculpt. And by sculpt, I mean, you know, upping this to something a little bit more and then going into sculpting and starting to paint some shape if I wanted to. But the advantage of this kind of, let me turn off that. The advantage of box modeling for the most part is I can take, by doing this low poly character, I can now, before I go and add a whole bunch of detail, I can subdivide him, which is similar to what I showed you earlier for UV editing, and go ahead and set up his UV maps so that I don't have to, it's not that difficult to, it's not that difficult to create a UV map using the super low poly model and then go ahead and add detail in a non-destructive way, like with sculpt or whatever, and I'll have my UV maps laid out and I can modify them in an easier way. So if I select this edge loop and say, well, that's the base of my head, I can mark it as a seam. Same thing here for the neck. And maybe I don't want the neck to be separate, but I do want this arm separate. And then I'll want to do the hand separate. Torso. Let's do it at the hips. Select that center line and mark that as a seam. And so there's the legs, and we can do the foot. Then, let's see, I want to be able to unwrap these, so let's put a seam down this back side. And we want to be able to unwrap the torso along I think that might be okay. Let's also don't forget the hand. So what I'm going to do to unwrap the hand is just come along this bottom line. That way it'll unwrap. Mark seam. And if I'm doing it on this side, I'm getting it on the other as well. And maybe we'll do a split here. We do want the thumb. Kind of unwrap, mark seam. Might want these interior edges. Excuse me. Marked. And you may want the, instead of doing the whole hand unwrap this way, you may want individual fingers unwrapped too. I'm going to leave it like this for now, just for the simplicity. And then you need an edge for it to unwrap on these tubes. You need to create like along the origin of the tube, you need to make a seam. That's what I did on the back leg here. The torso should just unwrap around itself, but just in case it doesn't, mark that. And the same for the head. And we'll do this back head. All right, so now if I select that, select everything, and do UV, unwrap, notice I get, we can see what we get. So this is our torso, this is our arm and our leg, this is the head, hand. It's only doing one side because the mirror isn't applied this way. Hold on. If I turn this on, then I can select everything and do an unwrap. And I might want to flip on the U and then offset like 1. Apply. Should unwrap. Let me see if it's select by island. W. Nope. Might be because the mirror's happening after, even with that. But what we can do is, once we've got this, if we say, okay, this is as far as I want to go, I'll do the rest of my editing after I get this set up. You can go ahead and apply the mirror. Oops, gotta be applied in object mode. Apply it. Now it's whole. If I go to edit, select all the faces. There we go. There's our unwrap. UV unwrap. Everything unwraps. Hands, they're all kinds of messed up because of the overlap, which is why we want to cut the fingers out. Go back and get our mirror back. Let's go to edit. So we can just select these edges. Let's turn off. I'm just cutting the fingers out so that they'll unwrap. Mark seam. And part of what was causing the problem was probably this thumb here. Mark seam. And I believe the head was having issues, so let's do a seam there to help it unwrap a little bit. Excuse me. And that should do it. Apply. Edit. Select them all. UV unwrap. So now you can see all the individual fingers from the hands. There's a little bit of overlap there that's weird from one of the fingers. We can fix where you see how it's kind of overlapped. But the torso did pretty good. This is the head. Could probably use a split here, but everything, can't tell what this is the leg, I believe. We can tell by selecting. Yeah, see the feet are having an issue because they're not set to unwrap easily. And that's easy to fix by turning off X-ray mode. And let me get rid of this plane. I'm just going to delete the plane because it's kind of in the way. Select, edit, and then what you want is to get a seam along the back. Just enough to unwrap the foot so that it unwraps easily. That should work. Now, because we don't have the mirror turned off, we have to do the same thing here. Let's try that. Unwrap. Now our foot's good. Fingers. Let's see which one of these is causing the problem. It's not that. It's not those. Maybe it's the arm. Trying to figure out which one of these. Okay, so it's one of these. Probably. I missed a, might be the thumb. Yep, the thumb. It's this split right here. So if I fix that by by just clearing it. The same thing on the other side. Then everything should unwrap. Yep, there we go. And then you can stack and arrange them however you like. This is, you know, pretty odd unwrapping for the head. Like this is the bottom of the neck. Under here, so these, oops. Like that. But you could easily fix that, unwrap it, do something different if you wanted. You could basically put 2 edges right here, just mark these. At the corners and unwrap again. So that helps with the distortion a little bit. And then you have your texture map sort of set up for painting this guy later. So if we go into shaded mode, you can see it's not optimal, but if you wanted to go in and paint a texture or whatever, it's a good place to start because he's got all of these islands appropriately set up for texture mapping with the right amount of detail kind of for each one. And if we did a modifier, so if we wanted to add our subdivision, it will subdivide him. And if we apply that, go back to our edit mode, we have smoothed out UVs without all the overlap. So it's a way of getting to a character you can, or it's a kind of a base character that you can work with and sculpt more, and easily being able to set up a UV map. So anyway, that's intro to the interface, box modeling, and also texturing bonus. Hopefully that helps to get you familiar with Blender as a starting point, and we'll get into more detailed character tutorials later. Hope you liked the video. If you have any questions,